So just a quick show of hands for those of you who are on the screen. Did anyone here notice your attention go out to the sound? Just a quick show of hands. Okay, pretty much everyone who's on camera had their hand up. Great, so you've been practicing already. You noticed your mind go out to the sound. Did anyone, while we had just a moment of quiet, notice your body? Notice your body is sitting here. Did anyone notice that your mind went off to think? Okay, we've got some real practitioners in the house. Good stuff. Awesome. iPad, you can lower your hand. Thank you very much. So I am, like several others that I see on my screen, recently back from Thailand, where we have been studying and learning with some of the greatest masters of meditation and mindfulness in the world. And this place that we've been to and these teachers that we've been learning from they really comprise what I would call sort of the hotbed of the movement and awakening that we're experiencing in our modern time right now. A lot of the teachers that we're familiar with, so those that you've known who have written books, who give workshops, and they have a 5-step program to this, and they have their own sort of methodology for how to accomplish this or accomplish that. These are perhaps very talented individuals, and they're probably very talented in very specific niche types of things, perhaps healing or something else. But this is not really the kind of thing that I'm talking about today. I'm talking about the complete eradication of suffering as we know it. And the sad thing about this is that we actually don't know what suffering is. That's a big problem with most of us in our modern world. We don't know suffering. And so when I talk about the eradication of suffering and I talk about these teachers, it's very hard for the modern person to understand how rare, how valuable, and how utterly incredible that is. The kinds of teachers and the caliber of practitioner that I'm talking about isn't something that we are going to find here in the West, unfortunately. And this is why a group of us will travel to somewhere in Asia, travel 24 hours to get to a place to learn from these teachers who have walked the path themselves. They've learned from a teacher who has traveled that path, reached the end of that path, doesn't have anything more to learn, does not suffer anymore. And they've walked that path, and they have actually reached levels of awakening themselves. And I'm not talking about just the average awakening here, as you might surmise from how I'm speaking. So this opportunity to learn from these teachers is something that is extremely valuable, something that's extremely rare, and it's almost incomprehensible to the average person. And so the average person isn't necessarily going to understand the value because they don't understand what suffering is to begin with. So how would you, if you don't understand what suffering is to begin with, how would you know what the eradication of suffering actually feels like or could feel like, or why it might be so important? So those of you who are assembled here today, I'm going to go through a little bit about these teachers and some of the important things that they teach and that they've been teaching, some of the things that I felt were important, and also give you a little bit of an insight into what to look for in a good teacher, how to tell that these teachers are not just making this up. They're not creating their own sort of 5-step program, and writing books and then making workshops and things like that. These are real teachers. So a couple of things. I told my teacher, Jess, who many of you know, that I wasn't going to make a bunch of notes, but a few minutes before we got on Zoom, I scribbled down a few things because I wanted to make sure there was some sort of linear fashion to what I'm doing, and so that it's understandable, easily understandable, and that I also don't go over time. So a few things that are important to sort of lay the foundation to understand. One of them is that there are different types of knowledge. So there's, my teacher just talks about this. You could read information and then you can acquire knowledge from reading. You can learn with a teacher, and by learning with a teacher, you can acquire that knowledge secondhand from that teacher who's in front of you. And then third, you can have the direct experience. And ideally, you would have all three. You would read a few things, get a little bit of a background into why you want to pursue a certain path or course of direction, and you would then find a really good teacher, perhaps the best that you can possibly find. In this case, this is what I'm talking about. And then you would practice and have the direct experience yourself. And at least one of the teachers, when we were in Thailand, talked about that very thing, about the different kinds of knowledge. They talked about learning, practicing, and then having that direct experience. And so the teachers that I'm talking about today have done exactly that. They have not only gone to the place of direct experience, but they've also experienced certain levels of awakening. And I want to apologize in advance if I misrepresent any one teacher or any of the teachings, because I am not at their caliber. I have learned with them for several years, but I'm not at the place where they're at. So I can't possibly really begin to comprehend their mind. But I've seen, from learning with them, I've seen some of the ways in which they are, in which their presence can actually help you to see certain things that you wouldn't be able to see on your own without that direction. And so if anything I say is misrepresenting, I apologize in advance. So I ask you to open your heart and listen with an open heart and open mind in order to understand. And in Thai, they use a term called khao chai, which means to understand. And it's interesting, the words khao chai, there's two words. Khao, I think, means to eat or to enter, like to bring something in. And jai means your heart. And so when they talk about understanding the teachings in Thai, they're really talking about the teachings penetrating or entering the heart. And so this is what I would like for us to do today, to open our hearts and listen that way. One of the teachers also talked a little bit about the different qualities of students and how some students are like a sponge. And if you have a sponge, there's so much space in there to be able to take in and absorb the teachings. And she contrasted that with students who felt more like a stone. And no matter how much water you pour in the stone, there's just hardly anything is going to get absorbed, right? And so I had to approach my time in Thailand, when I went to Thailand, with these teachers as not a mindfulness instructor, not the vice chair of the Mindfulness Society of Canada, not as a teacher of other things or someone who's been to Thailand many times before, but I really tried to approach it as like a kindergarten student, someone who's just starting out, just beginning, never heard this before, maybe heard a few things before, but really with an open heart and open mind. And if we're beginning to learn with a teacher, or even if we've learned for a while and we're in a place in our practice where we feel that we're stuck, the most important thing for us to be able to do is just listen to the teacher and not, but I'm different, but I have this problem, but I'm, I have Crohn's or colitis, it's just to listen to what the teacher says and take in what they say, and then allow it to absorb. Allow yourself to take it in and absorb it, and then practice under their guidance. And so this is really what I tried to do when I was in Thailand for about 7 weeks. During that time, 2 groups of students came. So there was a first group of students who were first-timers. A lot of them hadn't been to Thailand before. A lot of them hadn't studied with these teachers before. And then I had about 3 weeks in between, and then a second group of students arrived, and these students were more seasoned and they had gone to Thailand before. They had studied with some of these teachers before and had been practicing mindfulness for a bit longer. And what was interesting was that even though there were these two very different groups of students, the teachings never changed. The teachings were exactly the same. And there was something that one of the teachers had said, and it stuck with me, and it's coming up for me now, I'm remembering it now, was states of mind change, right? They come up, they last for a little while, and they fall away. Come up, last for a little while, and fall away. A happy moment comes up, lasts for a little while, falls away. An unhappy moment or unhappy experience comes up, the feeling lasts for a little while, it falls away. An itchy spot arises, and then it falls away. The truth doesn't fall away. The truth is the same. It's always the same. And so no matter what students come and go, the teachings are always the same. And it's up to us to practice what we've learned. And then when we go back and listen to the teachings again, the teachings, kauchai, enter our heart even deeper. They make more sense because we have actually practiced to the point where we start seeing some of the truths that have been taught, and we start understanding those truths even more deeply. And this is what I experienced, and I think a lot of the other students had also experienced during their time in Thailand with these teachers. I also want to mention a little bit about, on a technical level, the teachings and the teachers were all within the Buddhist understanding. Okay, so all learning the teachings of the Buddha, learning what suffering is, and learning all the way to the end of suffering, learning the path leading to the end of suffering, and had come to that understanding on some level. So these teachers have all reached one of the 4 levels of what we would call enlightenment. And when I say enlightenment, I'm not talking about like, oh, that's so enlightening, or someone might say their yoga teacher is enlightened, or they're, this, I don't know, prodigy that they know is so enlightened, or, there's a spiritual teacher who's a great speaker or orator or presenter, and they seem like they're enlightened. I'm talking about the real thing. And there's 4 levels of enlightenment. And I'm not going to go into detail about the 4 levels. But I will say that each of the teachers that we had met and learned from were at one of these 4 levels. The ultimate level being an arahant, okay, kind of like the Buddha, right? A fully enlightened being who never suffers, who does not experience suffering. Their body might deteriorate. Their body, of course, is deteriorating. Okay, their body is subject to time and space and all the deterioration that comes along with that. But their mind doesn't suffer along with their body. So there is an arahant who a few years ago was, diagnosed with cancer and went through all of the treatment and the chemotherapy and the poking and the prodding and being in the hospital and admitted in the hospital. And even though all of this was true, there was no mental suffering, no emotional suffering that went along with that. So imagine if you could go through cancer without suffering. Imagine a little mosquito buzzing around your head, something so small, and how worked up we get over that we can get the amount of anger that it would create in us to swat it away, right? If that's how much anger can be created in a regular mind to swat away a fly or a mosquito, that's how much work we have to do to get to not even suffering from something as big as a cancer. Okay. So this is, again, what I want to back up and say, for most people, what I'm talking about today and the teachers that I'm talking about today are unfathomable. They're beyond comprehension. And it is beyond comprehension. We cannot comprehend the mind of an enlightened being. What we can understand is that there are teachings, and those teachings have been passed down from 2,600 years ago, and those teachings are still applicable today. The truth is the truth, and those teachings do not change. And it's up to us to be the kind of student to be able to take in the teachings at whatever place we're at in our practice. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the teachers, and I'll talk a little bit about how to recognize one of these teachers and how to recognize, them as distinct from other kinds of teachers that we might have come across in our day-to-day. So I did make a couple of notes on a little piece of paper here about that. One of the things that you will find is that these teachers will not ask for anything. They don't ask for, like when I say don't ask for anything, they don't ask for payment. They don't ask for you to listen to them. They're not expecting anything from you. They've decided to teach because they understand how important and how rare these teachings are for people to come across. And one of the things that is very, very clear to me is that they want for us not to suffer. And it's not coming from anything personal within them. So they're not wanting this selfishly. They're not wanting to, okay, everyone has that family member, like if I just fix them, then my life will be so much easier and I'll be happier, right? If I just fix my dad or my mom or my sister or my husband or my wife or my kids, if I just make them this way, then that'll be better, right? Like, okay, my nephew was over. He just left about 15 minutes ago. And okay, I'm looking at 7, it was like right before I started. So about 20 minutes ago, he just left. And he's really picky about eating, like really, really picky. And I catch myself a lot when I'm around him. Oh, if he just ate these different kinds of foods, I could take him anywhere and it would be amazing, right? These teachers are not trying to change anyone. They're not trying to fix anyone. They're teaching out of the openness and the generosity, out of some of the perfections that they're working on or that they've already, I wouldn't say always perfected, but they might have. Their generosity is there so that we are the beneficiary of their teachings, not because they have any selfishness whatsoever. They don't want anything from us. So they're never going to ask for anything. They're not going to bless you. So there's a lot of saints and religious people and beings like that, hugging saints and, saints that you can sit in front of, and people flock to them, flock to these beings because they can feel that there's some really beautiful presence within them. And in some cases there are, like these might be avatars, or like you could think of, let's say the Dalai Lama, for example, right? And you can feel there's such a powerful being inside this body, inside the body of the Dalai Lama. But a real teacher is not ever going to bless you. And in some cases, the teachers that I went to visit were monks, and you might be surprised for me to tell you that in some cases, the teachers that we went to visit and learn from were not monks. And in a lot of cases, the teachers that were not monks were the most relatable and easy to learn from, because they understand the mind of a regular, average human being. And so because they're regular, average human beings. So one of them, one of the teachers, not one that we learned from this year, one of the teachers is a dentist. Like he's just a dentist, and he's practiced to this place where he reached one of these 4 levels of enlightenment. There's another teacher who is an artist that we learned from in a previous visit, he paints. This is a painter. There's another teacher who we also learned with on a previous visit who runs several companies. He makes natural health products like a big businessman. And yet he still makes the time every morning for his practice. He teaches hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students, mostly a lot of the Chinese students that come from China. He is in charge of teaching most of them. Incredibly powerful practitioner, incredible teacher, and by day he's wearing a business suit and in boardrooms, and on the weekends he's at the temple and he's teaching all these students and online teaching students. There was a young fellow that we learned with who was a monk temporarily. He ordained for a short period of time, and he must have had they say that he had a lot of past lifetimes where he had practiced. And so he was very close in his past lifetimes. And so he ordained for a short period of time and reached the first level of enlightenment. And then disrobed, and now he's living as a lay person, not as a monk, and he's teaching. There was also a woman who, I'm smiling because she was just adorable. Like, she must have been like 4'9" or something. She was just this tiny woman, and she I don't know if she had a job. She didn't mention to us if she had a job, but definitely not a monastic, not a nun or anything like that. And she was talking about how she would get angry. She'd get angry at her sister. Her sister would get on her nerves all the time, and she would talk about how she was practicing incorrectly for many, many years. So she was a bit older, and she talked about how she would practice incorrectly for many, many years, and she would come to learn from the main teacher in this lineage, and she had to stop practicing for a short period of time because her practice was very incorrect, and she'd been practicing incorrectly for so long that she needed to just not practice for a period of time and then come back to it freshly according to the correct principles of practice. And she also reached that first level of enlightenment. She had many stories to tell us, and she was just the sweetest lady, adorable lady, and you would look at her and not think anything of her. So another thing I should mention is that these teachers do not do anything to draw attention to themselves. They aren't standing on a soapbox. They're not making any proclamations. They are not going to be the ones to tell you, oh, I've attained enlightenment, or I'm at this level, or they're not going to announce it to anyone. It's actually considered rather inappropriate to do so. And even discussing the teachers in this way myself, it feels a little inappropriate, but what I am not doing today is I'm not going to mention them by name. Okay, so I'm not going to say so-and-so is at this level and so-and-so is at that level. But what I can tell you is that every teacher that I'm discussing today is at one of the 4 levels, okay? So they're not going to do anything to draw attention to themselves. They're not interested in the details of your life. So if you tell them, well, I haven't been practicing regularly because so-and-so's in the hospital, or I have to take care of this, or I have to take care, they're not interested in hearing the details of your life. One of the teachers, a woman, ran 5 companies, and she would get home at 11 p.m. and she would do an hour or 2 of walking meditation when she got home from work before bed. And the reason that she did walking meditation was because she knew that if she did sitting meditation, that she would fall asleep. She was that tired. So she did walking practice in order to keep herself awake during her practice. Not to go into any hazy, dreamy kinds of states, but to actually keep her mind alert and aware. And she even mentioned to us, I believe when the second group came, she mentioned to us that she had been doing exclusively walking meditation, exclusively, no sitting, only walking meditation this entire time. And only recently has she begun doing sitting meditation because she can no longer keep up that level of walking. So a really big learning for me, and I love walking meditation. I'm not particularly great at it, but I love walking meditation. And it was illuminating for me to hear that she had been doing exclusively walking practice up until this point. They're not coming back to, you know, how to see what a teacher is. They're not interested in the details of your life, so they're not going to listen to stories necessarily, right? They're going to ask you how your practice is going, or in some cases, they're just going to look at you and know how your practice is going, and then tell you what you need to hear to tweak your practice so that you're back on track. They only want to teach you when they're speaking with you. They're not interested in sort of chit chat. They're not interested in talking about extraneous. If they're telling a story, there's only one reason why they're telling the story, and the reason that they're telling you the story is to illustrate an example. And so, for example, the story I just mentioned to you about this one teacher who would come home really late and do only walking meditation, she shared that bit of information to inspire us, to inspire those of us who either have been doing walking practice and we're tweaking our walking practice, or those of us who weren't interested in doing walking practice or thought that walking practice is inferior to a sitting practice. In fact, walking practice is much more appropriate for us modern people than a sitting practice would be. Sitting practice is more appropriate for people who are naturally calm and don't have a lot going on in their lives. Perhaps people of 100 years ago, right? Today, we have phones, we have other devices, we have family, we have jobs. Even 60, 70 years ago, you would find half the population wasn't really working, right? We would have people who were homemakers or staying at home and taking care of just, I can't say just because it is a job, but taking care of their home. And so when you see these teachers, they're not interested in the stories. They're going to tell you what they need to tell you to teach you, and that's about it. There's a level of humility that you'll find in these teachers. And I actually, before we went to visit one of the teachers with the first group, I typed in my phone one word, and the word was humility. And I don't know why. I didn't know why I wrote that down or typed that out. But when we got there, this teacher was incredibly humble. He was like, don't project out to me. Don't think I'm the best. You know, I'm not better than you. In fact, he didn't even want to be sitting on a higher seat or a higher platform than a lot of the students because he was younger than a lot of the students. And in Thai culture, it's kind of inappropriate for, like, it's usually the young people who are supposed to show respect and humility in front of when they're face to face with someone who's older or elder to them. And so there was this humility that was so obvious when I was there and learning, and it was something that is starkly different than when you have a teacher here in the West. Also along the lines of, like, they're only teaching you when they're talking to you. They're not going to tell you like their hero's journey, or they're not going to tell you like, okay, here's how I got to where I am, or they're not going to take the first 5 minutes of a talk or a lesson to set you up and prove to you that they're worthy of listening to. In the West, that's the formula. Like, that's, if you join any talk or any kind, you're going to have somebody introducing them and, you know, sharing all the accolades or all of the prizes or all of the, you know, accomplishments of this person, or they're going to do it themselves. They're going to tell you, oh, like, I was down in the dumps and I was, you know, homeless or heartbroken or broke or whatever it was, and then this is how I got myself out of that, and I can teach you to do that too. They're not going to do that. These teachers, they don't care about talking about themselves at all. And it's so, frankly, it's so refreshing. I don't need to hear, I'll go on my friend telling me this is a teacher worth listening to. In this case, my teacher telling me, here are my teachers, come and learn in Thailand. But there's humility there. They're not going to, you know, they're not going to try and appear like the best. They're just going to teach you what you need to understand and what you need to learn. And let you then practice what that is. You won't usually see them pre-recording. They don't pre-record lessons to no one. You'll only ever see them teaching when they have an audience or they have a student or students in front of them. You're not going to find them pre-recording a mindfulness class, Mindfulness 101, and then here's the formula and then selling it. That's not what these teachers do. They only teach when there's students in front of them. And if that happens to be recorded and then you watch the recording later, then that's fine. But they're not going to pre-record a mindfulness course or a mindfulness lesson to just a camera. And then maybe one more thing. When they're finished teaching you, they're not thinking about you afterwards. They don't take you away with them in their head and like, oh, I hope that this person is doing okay, or I have to go and tell them something else, or I forgot to say this, or I need to do a part 2 of that lesson. They're not thinking about you when you leave. They taught you what you needed to hear, and that lesson is finished, and either kauchai, it entered the heart, or it didn't. And either you go and practice and have the direct experience, or you don't. And that's your path. That's up to you to determine how far you want to go. So that's a little bit about how to recognize these teachers. When you're in front of them, one more thing I will say is that when you're in front of them, some of them will be able to point to what you're doing and see how your practice is going, even without you saying a word, and tell you how to course correct. Some of them don't. So just because a teacher has a gift, and I'm trying to remember the number, I think it was only something like 180 out of 500 enlightened beings that were at the Buddha's time. So there was a congregation of 500 arahants, or fully enlightened beings, with the Buddha at a certain period of time. And out of that whole congregation, out of the 500, only 180 had psychic abilities or psychic powers or intuitive capacities in that way. The rest of the 300 and whatever it was didn't have those abilities whatsoever. So some of the teachers, don't be fooled. Some of the teachers can absolutely take a look and say, you shouldn't be practicing sitting meditation, you should be walking, or you're holding, or you're controlling, or you're lost, or try not to pull back into your object. Some of them will be able to say that right away. Some of them don't have that capacity, but they, without even realizing it, they teach you what you need to hear. So they're not consciously looking at each person and trying to help that one person at a time by seeing what they're doing. So a little bit about the teachings themselves. I'm going to go a little bit in order. I kind of wrote down the names of the teachers just so that I could kind of go back and recall what they taught. With each group, the first visit that we had was with a monk. And one of the things that he had taught that really spoke to me and stayed with me was something that a lot of practitioners, and you might be doing this. So these are some of the tips that I'm teasing out for you so that you might be able to identify yourself in some of these examples and say, oh, I do that. And then how do I course correct, or how do I tweak my practice so that I'm actually practicing according to the correct principles? So he had this thing where he said, if you're focused on the breath, if that's the object that you're using for your meditation practice or your mindfulness, your formal practice in mindfulness, if you're using, for example, the breath, then having your attention at the breath is fine. It's good. It's okay. But holding your attention at the breath is not good, and it doesn't get you very far. When your mind goes off to think or gets distracted from the breath and goes off, that's actually not a good thing or a bad thing, but it's natural. It's actually okay to let your mind go off in mindfulness. But the best part of your practice is when you know that your mind had gone off to do something other than be with the breath. That's what you're actually looking for. So let's take a moment. Let's all just take a moment, okay? Let's just notice that there's a physical body sitting here. Okay, physical body sitting here. We might feel the presence of, flatness at the bottom where the seat meets the bottom. Okay, we might feel the feet on the floor. We might feel the bending of the hips or the knees. We might feel our hands resting somewhere. Let's take it in totality. There's a body sitting, okay? And rather than focusing right at the nose or the nostril, and we don't have to close our eyes for this. If your eyes are closed, see if you can just let them be gently open in front of you. You don't have to look at the screen. You can just look down in your lap or at the edge of your computer, your desk, whatever's directly in front of you. So we want to be natural. We don't want to be unnatural. We want to be exactly how we normally are in our everyday life. Okay, so if we're sitting normally, we're usually not closing our eyes unless we're going to sleep. So let's keep our eyes open. And then we feel this body sitting here, right? And let's just be silent and notice the body for a few moments. I'd like you to put your hand up. I'm going to start again. And this time I'd like you to put your hand up, for those of you who are on screen, when you notice that your mind went off to do anything other than know the body sitting in the chair, okay? Okay, lots of hands are up. Excellent. You can put your hands down, okay? This is what usually happens. You're sitting in the chair, see the body sitting, the mind goes off, you know that the mind went off, right? It goes off in a couple of seconds. It's not going to be like you're forcing and holding and controlling your mind at the body for so long. That's not mindfulness practice. You're going to be sitting naturally, the mind's going to go off. As soon as you know that the mind went off, you know that the mind went off. That is one completed practice right there. And so this teacher set this up as a game, okay? And so if your attention is with the body or with the breath or whatever that object is that you've chosen, it might be a mantra, whatever it might be, if your attention is with that, you get a couple of points. You get just a couple of points. If the mind goes off to think or to feel or to hear or to sense something other than the body sitting or the breath or the mantra, whatever you've chosen, then you don't necessarily get any points. But if you notice the mind that's gone off, as soon as you notice that the mind's gone off to think, then you get a lot of points. And here's the thing, and a lot of us, you might notice this in your practice, that's for a lot of us, we think that that's bad, that the mind that's gone off is bad. And we pull our attention back to the body, or we pull our attention back to the breath. Oh no, the mind's off thinking, gotta get back here. Then you lose points. If you pull back, you lose points. Because what's going on is there's a fundamental misunderstanding. And the fundamental misunderstanding is that this mind is a stable thing. That's not true. We don't have the same mind from one moment to the next. This mind that came up and put this finger up was one mind, and this mind that came up and put this finger up is a different mind. This mind that laughed was one mind, and the mind that stopped laughing was another mind. Always arising and falling, arising and falling, arising and falling, arising and falling. And that fundamental misunderstanding is running the show, is actually the thing that's running the show. We think that we are a person and that our mind is a certain way and that we were depressed all morning. No, we weren't depressed all morning. We weren't depressed for 13 years. We weren't, angry for 40 minutes. We had moments of anger arise and fall. Confusion, arise and fall. Fear, arise and fall. Hunger, arise and fall. Boredom, arise and fall. All of these minds came up and fell away. Each one, very quickly, very, very quickly. Which is why when you know that the body's sitting, or the body's breathing, or there's a mantra, and then the mind leaves, it's a different mind. And then when the mind sees, when consciousness sees that the mind went off to do something else, that's a whole other mind, and that's the mindful mind right there. That's what we're all working for, that one knowing. And then when we pull back, we're operating under the misunderstanding that that mind was bad and it left, and we should pull it back and try and hold it. We don't hold anything. Okay, so what do we do instead? We let the mind go off. If we see it, if we see that the mind left, we know it. In that moment, there's a mind that's knowing the other mind. That's mindfulness. That's actual mindfulness operating right there. Okay? If we notice that the mind pulled back and we see that the mind pulled back in the next moment, then great, we saw that it pulled back. And then we just start again. In the next moment, we just start again. We see this body sitting. Okay, so it's a really important lesson, but one that is so rare to come across with a teacher. No other mindfulness course or I guess you could say movement is going to teach something like that. They're not going to teach that. And this is the level of specificity that we're getting with these teachers. They know because they've practiced wrongly for many years in some cases, and they had a teacher who had finished their work and who was able to come back and tell them, this is what you're doing wrong. Here's how to fix that. Here's how to understand where you went wrong and how to practice from here on. Okay. There was a nun who we also practiced with, and she took a lot of time with the first group, and you could see that she knew that this was a new group, that this group of students had been practicing for, maybe a couple of years, not that long. And she took a lot of time to explain the practice. And she was at the third level of enlightenment. Extremely generous, kind, graceful, just so generous with her time. Even before the main teacher, the Arhat, who has finished his work, would come out and give talks on the weekends. Even right before that, she would be sitting with the AV guys, the guys who are running like the Zoom and who are doing the broadcasts and the telecasts and the Chinese translations and the English translations. There's all these AV, these tech guys who are doing all that stuff. She would be sitting with them and teaching them up until the moment that the main teacher would start. She wouldn't waste a second. She would teach them specifically, and right until the talk started. She reminded me that I had a lot of impatience in my practice. And so when we're practicing, it's really important to understand what is the thing that's operating in the background, because that stuff can come up so easily and be operating so easily. And when we start that way, then our whole practice is tainted with that. And so we do want to start a little bit freshly. And so there was another teacher that we had encountered, and she spent quite a lot of time with us. This teacher was not a nun or a monastic in any way. This was the teacher that I'm mentioning who had been running 5 companies and would come home at 11 p.m. I think she spent like 5 hours with us with the first group and maybe 4 hours with the second group. This woman is tireless. I don't know where she gets all her energy from. Incredible teacher, incredible teacher. She had some of us sitting. Those of us who practice sitting practice would be sitting, and she guided us that way. And some of us were walking. Those of us who like walking, she guided us in walking practice. And she had her very own way of teaching. She would always start off with telling us to have a little smile on our face when we start. And so this is an important lesson, because a lot of the time when people are new to the practice, they want to use the practice to fix problems in their life. I'm depressed, I'm unhappy, this bad thing happened in my life, I'm sick, I have an illness, and then they come to spiritual practice to try and fix those things. The practice is not to fix those things. Another thing, side note, another thing that one of these teachers is not going to do is they're not going to promise that these practices, that mindfulness practice is going to fix A or B or C problem. They're not going to say, oh, you're depressed, mindfulness practice will solve your depression, or you have ADHD, this is mindfulness for ADHD, or this is mindfulness for this problem. It's not applied mindfulness. This mindfulness that they're teaching is for the eradication of all suffering. It will help on all levels, okay? It's not going to make your life and all the people in your life perfect, but it's going to eradicate the suffering that arises in your heart when you're upset about something in your life, or when you're not in agreement with something about something that's going on in your life. All of that is what we're trying to accomplish here. And it's far beyond any fixing any one thing in our life or any other thing in our life. So she would always get us to start by having a little smile on our face. So let's do this together. You might even think of something sweet. Okay, so personally me, I had my nephew here earlier. We watched an episode of Avatar. Thank you, Susanna, for introducing us to that cute little TV show. We watched an episode of this TV show. I made him pasta. He was so happy, and I remember him, and automatically, naturally, inside, I'm smiling. So see if you can just give yourself something to smile about for a moment. Remember something. It might be a pet. It might be a happy holiday you had, a moment that you shared with someone that was meaningful, something that was really beautiful, lovely, sweet. Okay? And see how easy it is? Okay? We think happiness is this elusive thing, but it's not that hard to be happy. Remember that every experience is momentary, right? So in the moment, start with a blank slate. Start with something kind of neutral or maybe a little bit light and happy. Okay, so she would always tell us to start that way. And then she would say, what's sitting in the chair? What's this sitting in the chair? Okay, so she would bring our awareness immediately to, there's a body sitting in the chair. Okay, there's this physical body, it's sitting. Okay. Show of hands, how many of you felt slightly uncomfortable with the silence a moment ago? Okay, good. So just noticing that, right? So that's a moment. You just did a moment of practice. So easy, right? So easy. Where's the happiness now? Do we notice the happiness came down a notch? Maybe it went up a notch? For some of us it went up, for some of us went down. Some of us, there was a little expectation. Asher's pointing to the ceiling, went up. Okay? Usually when mindfulness comes up and we can see something that the mind did, the happiness increases. Okay, there's a little bit of a spike in the happy, a little bit brighter, a little bit lighter. This was the level at which she was teaching us. She was also teaching, in particular for me, I was doing walking and there was a lot of controlling happening in my walking. And she was trying to get me to stop controlling, and I thought that she was trying to get me to fix my controlling. But what she was trying to do was trying to get me to see the difference from when I was controlling to when I was not controlling. And noticing that at times there was controlling, and at times there was not controlling, controlling and not controlling. And this points to a really fundamental lesson from the Buddha's time, a mindfulness lesson about the middle way. And this is something that a pitfall that a lot of us practitioners find ourselves in when we practice. And you might also recognize this in your own practice too. And that is when we're holding too tightly. We might be holding to the breath or a mantra or even a movement. We might be over focusing or controlling or holding too tightly. And that's one end, okay? And then we might be lost in thought or lost in daydreams or even falling asleep, completely the other end of the spectrum, right? And what we're aiming for is what the Buddha called the middle way. And what is the middle way? It doesn't mean I'm going to, temper everything. It means that I'm not going to be holding too tightly and I'm not going to be completely lost either, but rather I'm going to be aware of wherever the mind is in any given moment. There's this middle place which is called awareness. And so if the mind is veering towards tight, know that it's tight. If it's veering towards being lost, know, remember, breathing or body sitting, lost, and then knowing, right? That knowing is the middle way. So we often will fall into the pitfall of either too much control or completely lost. And these teachers, and especially this one teacher, was really, for me, was trying to show me the difference between the two and when my concentration was aware and in the right place. In fact, when the second group came, she was giving a talk and I was just sitting, and because I've been practicing so much between the first group and the second group, when I came to sit down, she was like, did you notice that your mind has samadhi now, that states are coming and going, but the mind isn't moving. It isn't moving to here and there and all over the place. It's just, it's able to stably notice what's coming and going and moving and moving and moving. And so that was a really important thing for her sometimes. So these teachers will point out to you what's going on in your own mind so that you can see, not to fix the problems, but so more so that you can see. That's more necessary than fixing the problem. Seeing what you're actually doing or what your practice is like in that moment. So what's sitting in the chair? You notice what's sitting in the chair? Anyone smiling? Notice that you're smiling? Anyone notice a little happiness go up a little? Just slightly? Okay, good. Excellent. That's all that it takes. It takes awareness. It really just takes awareness. There was one more teacher, actually two more teachers I want to talk about. So one teacher, when the second group came, we went to go visit him in the middle of nowhere. It was funny, my teacher's wife was sitting next to me in the van and she was like, welcome to the middle of nowhere. And it was literally, we were, I don't know where we were, it was just forest, forest, forest. And then we went up a big, big hill and went to his temple, and we went and sat for maybe half an hour before he came out. And he was so powerful, so incredibly powerful. He was giving his talk in the dark. And I felt like he didn't turn on the lights because it would have just attracted all the bugs, because we were literally in the forest and open air, you know, temple up on this very, very high hill. And he gave such an incredible talk, and then he saw us again the next afternoon. Incredible teacher. He was a monk, and he talked about ignorance and the ignorance of not knowing this body and mind. And so he used his hand. I feel like he was talking with his hands so much. So I have to kind of talk with my hands too now, just to kind of illustrate for you what he was talking about. He talked about body and mind. So he was saying on the one hand, there's body and mind. Okay, and so when we hear body and mind, these are the things that we are identified with. These are also the things that we are able to experience with. So our eyes, ears, nose, mouth, our sense of taste, our hearing, all of that stuff, our thinking, body and mind. Okay, these are all the things in which, all the ways in which we're able to experience and feel the outside world and be in the world and exist in the world. And they're swirling around, body and mind, thinking, feeling, sensing, remembering, planning, all of the physical kinds of presences. So body and mind swirling, sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes healthy, sometimes unhealthy, constantly, you know, going up sometimes, coming back down, always cycling around, body and mind cycling around over and over, changing. And then he talked about over here, which he called consciousness, but I'm going to translate, and he even said that the better word would be awareness. And over here was the bare awareness. And he also said pure consciousness at one point. And pure consciousness or awareness has one job only. It's not changing. It is only able to be aware of all of this stuff over here. It's just aware. And so while all of this is changing and all of this is cycling and good and bad and coming and going and happy and unhappy, all of this body and mind, moving and moving and moving, this is not moving. This is not changing. This pure consciousness is stable. This is unstable. This is stable, unstable, stable. And it has one job, and it is able to see this body and mind moving and changing states continuously. And he mentioned that you can do one of two things. You have choices in your life. And I love that he said this. Again, he's not going to force, these teachers aren't going to force you to do anything. They're going to present the teachings to you, and then it's up to you to take them and do with them what you will. And he said, You can either put the emphasis on body and mind and constantly trying to make this body and mind happy, constantly trying to make this body and mind happy, or and get swept up with this body and mind, or you can choose to put the emphasis on the awareness. And when you put the emphasis on the awareness, it's like you're charging a battery, and it gets more and more and more and more and more and more and more powerful. And when this side gets more and more powerful, this side gets less and less and less important, less powerful. And it stops running the show. And the way that he explained this to us was so incredible. I mean, he learned a few English words for us, which I thought was so beautiful, because he really wanted to make sure that we understood what he was saying. He said, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to not be okay. And he also said, practice until you reach success. And when I hear that, I look at all the teachers, and I don't know every teacher's life story, but I've heard a few things, and a lot of them will say, I've practiced for X number of years incorrectly until I found the right teachings. Or I came home from work at 11 p.m. and practiced for 2 hours walking meditation. Or, just these stories, and they're just short little stories, but they all point to the same thing, and that is, keep practicing and practice correctly. And so I guess the last teacher that I'll talk about, and any one of you can learn with him. You don't need to go to Thailand. He teaches in Thailand every Saturday and Sunday morning. He is a monk, and he is the main teacher who has this incredible community of practitioners studying under him, and some of them are at some of these 3 levels of enlightenment, that he is the head teacher and he is an arahant. And you can study with him because his teachings are broadcast in Toronto time, Friday night and Saturday night, every weekend. And so the teachings aren't just exclusive to people who travel to Thailand. The teachings are universal, and they're available for everyone. Every person on the face of this planet who has ears and understands a language and is willing to learn has the opportunity to practice to reach one of these 4 stages. And one of the things that he really talks about is going beyond object examination. So not just looking at this body, breathing or sitting or repeating the mantra, which a lot of people think meditation is, and it just stops there. That's not what we're doing. What we are doing is learning to use that as a tool, use that practice as a tool for characteristic examination, not object examination, characteristic examination. And the 3 characteristics that we'll see are that this body and mind are out of control, that they're suffering, and that they're not a self. And when we fully understand these 3 characteristics in our own direct experience, we free ourselves from suffering. And he will say that every time. He'll say that over and over again. And depending on where you, in different ways, and depending on where you are in your practice, that Kauchai enters the heart even more deeply. And so I often will wear, when I was in Thailand, I wore this locket that contains one of his hairs. So monks have to shave their head every month. And there were some of these lockets that were given out one year when I was in Thailand, and I don't know how I got the luck to receive one of these lockets, but on the back of it, it says in Thai, and I don't remember the Thai words completely, but have the mindfulness that sees this body and this mind as they are, naturally, as they are, with a stable and neutral observation. And that encapsulates the entire teaching in one sentence. So I hope that for those of us who have not been to Thailand and have not learned with these teachers, I hope that that gives you a little bit of an understanding about the teachers and the teachings and their importance, their rarity, how special they are, how important they are in this world. And I hope if you're interested and if you would like to go to Thailand someday and learn with them, I hope that you practice and study with my teacher, and you have the opportunity to go and visit these incredible teachers yourself someday. So let's all practice in the meantime. And if you don't have the opportunity to learn regularly with a teacher, then there are several teachers here. And I encourage you to email me if you want the name of a teacher who is teaching. You'll see some of their faces on screen actually right now, but I'm happy to put you in touch with any of them. So I hope that you do take that opportunity and take me up on that offer. Okay. So thank you all for listening. I want to end with my usual ending with a little bit of metta. So may all of you practice in your way according to the correct principles. May you all find happiness. May you all find health. May you all find well-being. And may you all be free from suffering. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Salima, for sharing such a beautiful perspective of the 2 tours you were on and the extra time you took in Thailand, and a synopsis of such amazing teachers and the teachings that were shared with you and so many of us who had the opportunity to be in Thailand. And I will second Salima's suggestion that should any of this hit a heartstring, that please make sure you find a teacher either amongst this community or with Jess, and take the opportunity to soak in and practice as much as you can, and hopefully find a way to get to Thailand in the future, because the experiences are above and beyond once in a lifetime. And for those of us who are really into mindfulness, it's an opportunity that I would say can't be missed. So please reach out to Salima or any of us if you want to learn more. And I'll just quickly share that we are closed next weekend, March 31st, for the Easter long weekend. So we're on break again, and we return in 2 weeks on Sunday, April 7th at 8:00 p.m. Dr. Rhoda will be teaching from Thailand, sharing her experiences, helping her aging parents, and giving us some tips and strategies with how mindfulness can help us cope with fear of aging and sickness and disease, and supporting all of us, let alone our family and friends, through the aging process, which is so important for so many of us and are facing those challenges day in and day out, and how mindfulness helps us support ourselves and support those people that we care about. So please join us again in 2 weeks, Sunday, April 7th at 8 p.m. And until then, I hope everyone has a lovely 2 weeks, and we will see you then. Thanks again, Salima. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Until next time.